Hello. In the late 80s and early 90s, the look and feel of Warhammer Fantasy and Warhammer 40,000 truly started to take shape. Recognisable worlds emerged that would form the basis of many decades and editions worth of play and enjoyment. My guest today was at Games Workshop during that vital period, and his incredible and beautiful art would grace innumerable White Dwarfs, GW books, and Warhammer Fantasy and 40k rulebooks. And his take on the greenskins would become iconic. From unforgettable images like the cover to the Orks Freebooters, to the Fimir, the Goblin Wolf Riders, and simply so much more. Paul Bonner's work helped to build the universes that we would come to know and love. I'm Jordan, this is Jordan Sorcery, and today I'm in conversation with artist Paul Bonner. Paul, thank you so much for joining me. It's great to be here having a chat. I like to start just by getting a bit of a background to like how you got started yourself. How did you become an artist? Where did the initial journey begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same for pretty much all kids, maybe less so nowadays, but at least when I was a kid, everybody was encouraged to draw or make little models out of plasticine, those wet, rainy days. And I just carried on. I found something that I loved and became a kind of language for me. And so I just carried on with it and went from there.
Mm.
And coupled with, I think, being inspired by art, in kids' books or books that my mum and dad brought home from the library of folk tales and fairy stories. That sort of thought, hang on a minute, people are actually making pictures of these kinds of things. And that was an inspiration that gave me a direction for trying to draw that kind of stuff myself. So when other kids stopped or went out to kick a football around or whatever, I was quite happy not to do that.
Sure.
Still am.
Do you remember any of the specific inspirations? Were there any particular books that were leaping out at you and inspiring you, or was it just the whole sort of range of everything that was out there?
What you mean when I was really, really young?
Yeah, when you were first getting started, what was drawing you to fantasy stuff, I guess, and fairy tales?
Well, I think those were the kind of books I seem to remember Mum bringing home from the library, folk tales and fairy stories. And when I enjoyed them, then we'd get more. I don't remember many particularly, as we say in Denmark, pedagogic, very sort of old-fashioned woke kids books being around then.
Right.
It was very much folk tales and fairy stories. And of course, The Hobbit I read at quite an early age.
Mm.
So it wasn't always just to do with the pictures. Sometimes it was the narrative itself that preempted pictures of my own in my own head, which is the basis of imagination. I think that in some ways that was bigger than seeing other people's art, was the luxury of hearing words or looking at words and then the pictures appearing of their own account in my own head, untainted by anybody else's art. It was my own influence. So I can't remember specific names of the young kids' books, but there was one of Lancelot of the Lake, quite a sought out copy now, and I don't know where mine went, with amazing illustrations, which I wish I had. And the folk tales and fairy stories, they were also became an influence later of lots of people like Arthur Rackham and Edmund Dulac from the golden age of illustrators.
Right.
And they kind of sat deep, as did John Bauer, my favorite, the Swedish illustrator who did lots of deep, dark forests with trolls and little dwarfs scuttling around.
Right.
That must have been in a book of world fairy tales, and that really sat deep and still does.
Yeah. Fantastic. So did you go on to study art at that point?
Yeah, I managed to just scrape enough O levels after 2 attempts to get into Harrow Art College, an illustration course. I had to do a year foundation course first with a bit of everything, but I knew I was going to be specializing in illustration, and that was fantastic. I mean, it was really what maybe is now old fashioned. It really concentrated on just looking at stuff, understanding it, and drawing it. So lots of life drawing with naked ladies or naked men, and trips to London Zoo drawing elephants, lizards. Not so fun trips to, I remember, huge old-fashioned Victorian engineering relics, drawing machines, lots of straight lines and perspective.
Right.
A nightmare, but necessary tools. So it was a diploma illustration, which really helped set me on the path.
Yeah. Was that with a view to becoming a professional artist? You knew that's what you wanted to do at that point?
Well, I never had any kind of life plan. It was just that that's what I love doing. So I better go in that direction and see what happens.
Yeah.
I wasn't sitting every day thinking, oh, how am I going to make a living? What's my plan for the day that college is finished? What's going to happen? It's a little bit more haphazard than organic. Oh, it still is, actually.
Yeah. So how did you end up finding yourself at Games Workshop then?
I actually I saw John Blanche, was it last year in Lucca, and we were talking about that because I couldn't remember. And he wasn't completely sure either. But he thinks that he saw my work somewhere and contacted me because I'd left college and I was just doing freelance, mostly really boring children's books around London, which is, I lived in northwest London. And he said he seemed to remember seeing some of my stuff somewhere. And he rang me up. In those days, there wasn't any email and stuff. And we had a chat, and he sent me some commissions to do, in the post. I can't remember what they were. They might have been your Fimir or something.
Of course. Yeah.
Really, really early stuff. I can't remember which ones. And it kind of built up from there, until some years later, they offered me the job up in the studio in Nottingham. I don't know, maybe late 80s, mid 80s or something.
Right. So with that then early period, it would literally just be, would John give you a call or send you a letter just with a load of specific commission briefs, would it?
Yeah. As I remember, I'm pretty sure he would just call me up.
Right.
And ask if I was busy, and I probably wasn't in those days all the time. So he'd just send some stuff through the post, as I remember. A little scribbled brief. I think once or twice they might have sent some little metal miniatures for reference, but it wasn't quite as strict as that then, that I seem to remember. But that was the sort of springboard, yeah.
Right, yeah, because I'm always really interested in that because obviously at that time there was a lot of work being done in many different disciplines to kind of build the IP, I guess, of Warhammer and kind of essentially find what it looked like and what it felt like. So did you kind of have free reign to sort of interpret things in your own way and kind of bring your own kind of character to it?
Blimey. The earliest ones, like I said, I think looking back at it now, if it's the right word to use, it was quite generic Warhammer stuff, the classic tavern scene with the barbarian and dwarves and things. And that was a pretty free reign. I might have been encouraged to look up some old copies of White Dwarf, or John might have even sent me maybe an old catalogue or something so I could see the miniatures. But I don't remember that I was ever specifically asked to, hey, can you copy the guy on page 76, or we need that wizard to look like that. I don't remember it was like that then. It seemed quite generic to me,
Right. Yeah. And then
if that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah. And I suppose a lot of the work of artists like yourself was what was making it less generic over time, wasn't it? Because you were bringing more sort of flavor to the different pieces and the different elements of the world.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't have occurred to us while we were doing it, but yeah, maybe you're right that it helped forge specific looks for things. So I know that happily that they did give me quite a few goblins and orcs, but pretty sure it's before I moved up there. which I love doing those anyway. And I think I had a pretty free reign in how they looked, in terms of how big the noses were and stuff like that. So yeah, it could well be that I helped in my own little way establish a look.
Mm.
But I'm sure, to be honest, there were already miniatures that people like Kev Adams and others, I can't remember the names, Bob Ollie was that one, that had
Sure,
already
yeah, Bob Ollie. Yeah.
of orcs and things. And as I said, I suspect John might have sent me one or two in the post that, hey, that's what the orc face looks like. They don't have goblin noses. This is the little piggy nose. And
Mm.
okay. But other than that, clothing and stuff, all that regimentation was a lot further down the line.
Right. Yeah. So you moved to Nottingham on a sort of more permanent basis then?
Yeah, yeah. I that would have been late mid 80s, 87 or something, 88. Um, I was a bit frightened being stuck in a rut doing kids' books in London, because there wasn't a big fantasy scene at all like there is now, and there was no internet where you could had visual access to everything all over the world. So it was a very shut off world that I must admit I didn't know existed
Mm.
until John contacted me. I had no idea of Warhammer or little miniatures.
Mm.
The only miniatures I knew were Napoleonic stuff and Airfix, like everyone of my generation had.
Mm.
And suddenly to find out that there were people making dwarves and goblins, wow, that was really, definitely a few doors opened in my head there. But yeah, so John, yeah, I think, no, I went up to a Golden Demon, not in Nottingham. There was in another place. I remember my sister and I drove up, and I met John, and he asked me that if I'd be interested to move up full time to Nottingham, and it never occurred to me. But at that time, like I said, that suddenly to realize that, hey, I've got a chance to do fantasy stuff, not get caught up in this children's book world. And so I wasn't that busy. I didn't have a girlfriend or anything. So I decided I'll try it.
Yeah. Do you remember what was the vibe like when you got there and the sort of the ways of working?
Uh, well, I mean, I loved it. It seemed so laid back, if you like, and organic. All sorts of different people getting on in little corners doing their own thing. There was sort of proto punks, there was old hippies, there was all sorts. It was great, and there was a work ethic, but it seemed very. The enthusiasm kind of overrid that, and I think it created its own energy. And for me, it was exciting just suddenly trying something completely new in life, moving away from where I'd always lived
Mm.
and moving up where I knew absolutely nobody. And, people were really friendly, but there was that sense that all these people had come from a passion and put together in a melting pot. So there was this real sense of creating something that nobody else was doing, and it was the kind of stuff that if we weren't being paid for it, we would have been doing it anyway. I think all
Right.
these people, whether it was the miniature painters or the sculptors or us, I guess even the management, if you could call it that, they were also deeply passionate about it, and yeah, it was a great environment, and it was a fun place, in crazy times.
I'll bet, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
did you find yourself, I mean, I guess from a sort of an artistic kind of process and as your own style is evolving, did you find
Yeah,
yourself learning or sort of being inspired by the likes of John Blanche that you were working with?
yeah, because as I said, the access to see other people's work was very limited. It was just if you stumbled across something in a bookshop, and so I knew very few fantasy artists. I was aware of Frazetta and the Hildebrandt brothers, and like the old ones, like I'd mentioned before, from old fairy tales and stuff. But anything else, yeah, there was nowhere to see it particularly. But
Hmm.
then as I got into that world, then of course those doors opened and people would say, "Hey, have you seen this guy? Have you seen that guy?" And it was always on book covers or in model shops or something. So it was very inspiring, if only because it was so nice to see other people living in this world,
Hmm.
or wanting to live in that world and doing the same thing, and they were passionate about it. So that was the inspiration. And being able to compare. Hey, I do these orcs or goblins, and hey, look how they do theirs, and which ties in again with, as you said, finding that direction towards subliminally creating a specific look for what became the behemoth that is Games Workshop.
Yeah.
So yeah, very inspiring days. Very much.
Did you find your own style changing at all, or like did you get a sort of more consistent style at that time?
Not really. No, I mean, because the whole thing was, any artist worth his salt, all you're doing is trying to get better and better.
Hmm.
And nobody asked for a specific style. Hopefully, you get employed because people like your style. And then what's the English word? It develops into a style that maybe fits into the world you're trying to portray. But I never really had to change anything. I think it's just the attempt to try and be better all the time, which in other people's eyes maybe looks towards changing a style.
Hmm.
But I think artists should be very wary of trying to take on a style or something, like putting a coat on and off. That's very risky stuff.
Hmm. Is that
I
because
think the style comes just through constant work, and
right.
trying to be better.
Is there a danger with that you can sort of lose your own voice almost?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of artists that are really, really good, but you can see that they've been inspired. I would use the word influenced too much by somebody else. And I won't knock it if that's what they love doing, then great. But sometimes I think, what's the point? You're obviously really, really talented. Why are you basing so much of your style on somebody else? What somebody else has worked hard to achieve, unless they're specifically being asked to do that for a job, of course. But otherwise, it's best to find your own language.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I was really curious about actually is it feels like I believe some of your pieces were on a relatively small scale in terms of like the physical piece,
Yeah.
but very, very detailed. I mean, what's the sort of process for working in that kind of intricate way?
Um, ruining my eyesight. Well, not back then when I was younger. You could do it without squinting, but yeah, I mean, maybe I don't know. Again, when you're a kid, you're not naturally drawn to draw on massive canvases or rolls of wallpaper.
Hmm.
It's just a natural what the paper's given to you, sketchbook size or whatever, and I think it becomes ingrained and carries on from that. And of course, work-wise, there's time constraints. You'd never finish of a piece if it was a meter wide, no matter how much you'd love to try that once in a while. So you just draw something that you can be comfortably hunched over, at a desk. And I just I think I do a very, very scribbly pencil drawing. And then I had a collection of black fiber tip pens that I used. Which the older they got, you get different shades from them, and but I think that was only actually because of what they needed for White Dwarf.
Right.
They needed, black and white work, and I'd never really done that before outside of pencil drawing for my own pleasure. So I had to make some kind of jump to a medium that a camera could actually capture, instead of just really soft pencil lines. So it's quite obvious actually when I look at the early stuff. Some of it's really savage, very hard black and white. And then the longer I was doing it with them, I managed to find the middle tones, and they become a lot more, at least in my eyes, expressive, with lots of grays achieved from these worn out pens. So yeah.
Did you have to work really quickly for White Dwarf? Because it was quite a quick turnaround for issues, wasn't it?
I don't remember that we got a lot of pressure of
Oh.
somebody over our shoulder saying, come and hurry up. Of course, there were deadlines for printing, And they must have said that, sometimes, hey, we need this to go off on Friday or something. But I don't remember that. I don't remember being particularly stressed by it. I think, yeah, no, yeah, there must have been deadlines all the time,
Mm,
but because of the organic nature of it, at least in those days, I think they kind of knew advance which direction they were going in, and they were quite happy to stir the pot and let things simmer a bit. And when something was finished, hey, I know we can use that in White Dwarf, or we can
mm.
use that in the rule book or whatever. He said, I don't remember those stressful deadlines that much.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned the Fimir earlier, and you obviously did a load of really lovely pieces that graced
Uh,
White Dwarf's article about the Fimir and kind of really established them. Do you remember working on those pieces? Were you drawing on classic folklore, or again, do you have a kind of free hand, or like how did you approach that?
oh, I must, yeah. I'd never heard of Thimia before, I must confess.
Mm,
And I think that I seem to remember they'd had some metal models, because I'd done that as a freelancer when I
sure.
was down in London. And I'm pretty sure they sent some metal models down the post. Um,
Right.
I thought, God, they're weird, because with a tail and that one eye, it was
Yeah.
very like alien-like to me, very strange direction. And as I
Mm,
said, I'd never heard of any folklore culture where they came from. So it was quite a challenge. And I still think they're weird with that one eye.
sure. Yeah.
It's very fantasy like almost.
Yeah.
But very, very cool designs. I
Yeah.
mean, is it something from ancient Irish?
I believe so. Yeah, the sort of original kind of inspiration was drawn from that kind of folk tales and reinterpreted slightly for the Warhammer world. But that
Yeah.
was one thing I was curious about as well, because you did many pieces that well, probably the only pieces really that exist in Warhammer's history that kind of explored a bit more of almost the culture of the Fimir. So you see them at war, you see them in their tribes, you see them moving together with shamans and all that sort of stuff. And I was wondering if that was if you were bringing that, or you were just told, okay, draw some stuff where they're hanging out together, that kind of thing.
Well, I must admit, I mostly remember where they were, having punch ups in
Sure,
swamps,
yes.
moorlands,
Mm,
with poor humans trying to settle there. I don't remember so many a day in a life of a Fimir
sure.
kind of thing. To be honest, I remember doing a shaman, but again, I suspect that was based on a metal model
Right.
already. So, as opposed to when I was doing the orcs, because I don't think the Fimir were ever that big of a thing,
No. No.
sadly for you.
Sure. Yeah, they never really took off
Yeah.
and
So
took
I
root.
don't remember being asked to delve into or create a culture for them.
Right.
They were just there, these one-eyed weird things bashing up people in moorlands and
Sure.
swamps. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I mean, the other, or I mean, obviously, of many sort of roles within your time at Games Workshop, you also did some art for the book line, the GW Books series. I wondered if you remembered any of those pieces that you were working on, because they would obviously turn up in the illustrated books that came out around 89 through to 91.
Which books do you mean?
So this was the GW books range, and there would be anthologies of fantasy stories like Ignorant Armies and Red Thirst, and some of those, and there's some individual pieces within there.
I remember the name Red Thirst. You mean
Right.
like little paperbacks, were they?
Yeah,
Or
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, fiction books.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah, I remember one or two, but like even now, all these people that come out with so many different publications, it's
Just folds into
very
the
difficult to keep
sure.
tabs on what pops up where.
Yeah,
Um, and we were a production line in a good kind of way. So if John came in and said, "Oh, we need some Chaos Warrior in a thunderstorm for this,"
mm,
you often this bit didn't really make an impression. You just got on and did the Chaos Warrior in a thunderstorm, and they took it away and put it wherever they needed it.
right.
But I must admit, I don't know so much about where things actually appeared in print or not.
Sure.
But I've got some originals lying around in drawers, and I know that there definitely weren't white dwarfs. So that red thirst, that definitely pushed a button that I remember doing a couple for something like that. Yeah.
Right, yeah, and there was obviously the a couple of 40k books and the Dark Future books as well, which was kind of
Oh
a
yeah,
Mad
yeah. Okay,
Max.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, yeah. I remember Dark Future. Then it was getting a bit more organized by then and
right,
specific. So this is definitely for this, and that's definitely for that. This is this world we're building, and now you can start basing your drawing on these concepts and things.
right,
Whereas I said before, it was much more organic with a free hand. So
sure, yeah, and obviously then as 40k came along and had sort of became the new very
yeah,
exciting world that was getting a lot of investment and a lot of work on it. I mean, your orcs for 40k really sort of became almost the definitive view in the art of what an orc looks like. I mean, you mentioned some of that about how you sort of were developing it based on the miniatures and kind of bringing that to
yeah.
the art. But I was curious about your general kind of approach to the greenskins and what your sort of because I think people would really recognize a Paul Bonner
Uh,
orc or goblin.
yeah, the approach. I don't know. I mean, I think me and Orcs, we sort of found each other and we had a lot in common, and I really felt at home drawing them. And yeah, it's not fair to say kindred spirit, but there's something in them pushed a button on me, and there was so much character, and they're not meant to be funny, but there was an element of humor, or at least in those days, that none of the other races or beings had at all. And to me, that automatically gave them an awful lot more character, just their attitude to things. Um, so I was more than happy to be sort of let loose on them. And thinking back, I did have quite a free hand in how they looked. So long as they didn't have a big nose, the size of the jaw and all that. That was they happily they left me alone with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I loved it. I still do. So,
I mean, there's some iconic images there, and then just the physicality, and like you say, that real sense of there is a humor to them, and there is a sort of comedic
yeah,
aspect, but there's also the savagery and the sort of brutality is
yeah,
definitely
yeah, yeah.
definitely in the mix, and you can see it. I mean, do you
Yeah.
recall working on the freebooters image at all? Because that's the iconic image, that one.
The painting.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, that was. I mean, that was almost the one that broke the back. That kind of got me to leave in the long run.
really,
Well, yeah, because I wasn't allowed to do color work. And it got to a point just driving me crazy because I loved doing all the stuff I was asked to do, but it was screaming out to me for color, color, color. And they already had the guy that did all the color, and they wouldn't let me in. And so I sat up late in the evenings back in our shared house in Nottingham, doing that. This is my kind of thing to say, hey, look, I can paint. Could you please let me do some color work? And so I sat up and did that, and they loved it, and they used it. I think on the back cover of White Dwarf first,
right.
and then they eventually used it on the Freebooters book. But they wouldn't give me any more color work, and so that was kind of it, really.
Right, right. And it
I,
was that
I
just
love doing
because
it. If you forget the sort of the backstory, it was such fun to do.
did it take a long time? I mean, it's quite a lot of detail on there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can't remember how long because it was sitting up at night after I'd worked in the daytime. So
Right.
it was probably dragged out. I had a social life with the other people there to think of as well.
Hmm.
So it was probably a while, but I knew in the back of my mind that the freebooters was going to be a thing.
Hmm.
So I knew that there probably was a rough idea that I've got to have this done by this particular time so I can wave it under the nose and say, look, you know,
Yeah. I mean, that's
uh,
fascinating that it's almost on spec then. You were essentially pitching
yeah,
yourself for
yeah,
that for the,
yeah.
the color work.
Yeah, I mean, I never thought of it that way, but maybe it shows how much I did enjoy doing the orcs. But it was also, I must say, it was just a deep frustration at not. Oh, there's your cat having a
Yes,
stretch.
here she comes.
But it was also just a deep frustration at, literally years of not painting. You know, just missing color, and this
Mm.
all these wonderful beings and creations that they come out with, they just scream out to be done in color, and it was just making me nuts that I couldn't, so
Yeah, I mean, was that the result of like that they only had, because obviously White Dwarf wasn't being printed in full color at that time, and the books weren't being printed in full color. So is it there's only so much space for color art, so we need people to do line art,
well, yeah, I guess that was the argument.
right?
It wasn't good enough for me, but of course, yeah, that's a common sense argument. Yeah, there wasn't a lot of money for massive color productions like they do now.
Hmm.
I never thought of that, but you're right. But that's what I was told. Yeah, we like what you do, and we need the black and white work. So,
Right,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah, but then obviously, yes, the Freebooters piece was a terrific piece, and it graced
Oh,
that
thank you.
cover, and it has really stayed in the memory, I think, and a lot of people really
Well,
love it because again, that the real character of the orcs within that image, it's so vibrant and they're so full of life. In a way that they aren't always. So you definitely managed to capture something about the orc
no, thank you
in
very
that
much.
image. So, I mean, obviously there was lots of different pieces that you did at Games Workshop. Besides that Freebooters piece, do you recall any that were particularly challenging or exciting, or that you look back fondly on?
um, yeah, I mean, all the orc stuff, especially I think some of the first ones I did four relatively large pieces of orc everyday life. Well, thinking back now, it's weird, but I did have a complete free hand.
Mm.
There was an orc village settlement for 40K stuff, and a weird spider clan thing I did with a guy, the orc chieftain, being shown how his leg was going to be cut off and supplanted with a mechanical one, and that was because I guess it was John said, if you've got the idea, yeah, go away and make a story of that. And that's the fun for me in art is telling a story. It's
Mm.
got to have a narrative, and because that draws people in subliminally. They say, what's he doing? What's he saying? And look at the scratches on his knee or the hole in his elbows on and the clothes there. Well, how did that get there? And I just love all that little details that lead towards creating a narrative. And for some reason, they let me do that with a series. I think they ended up about 5 or 6 relatively large pieces for me of just orcs doing whatever I wanted them to do. What else? I did a couple of Tyrannid things that was a bit challenging. It was kind of fun because it was different, and hopefully, any artist worth his salt should enjoy a challenge.
Mm.
And I think one I enjoyed too much because they wouldn't use it. They thought it was too disgusting. And that's even when Adrian Smith was there. I'm still really proud of that, actually. I've still got it here, and it's got the official kind of, what you call it, little sleeve they kept them in for storage. And it's
Right.
got "do not use" across it.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah.
I should almost dig it out, actually, just so you can see it, but I don't know if you'd be able to see it here. It's quite funny because it was never used because they thought there's too many disgusting things going on. The Tyranids milking this sort of pile of human bodies and things. So,
Oh wow.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That's fascinating. I mean, that really must push the boundaries if yeah, like late 80s, early 90s Games Workshop wasn't willing to use it.
Yeah, I was quite, even Adrian was quite surprised, because he was the one coming out with all the edgy stuff. And I remember him specifically that sometimes John or maybe Alan Merritt would sort of drift around the studio. And, John, of course, was always complimentary and enthusiastic. And, I'm not sure that'll get past Alan or whoever or Phil. And so sometimes they drift up, Alan or Phil, and definitely sort of, that's great, but hey, can't do that, Adrian. You'll have to rub that bit out and start again. So poor Adrian, he had to put up with a lot more than I ever did. His imagination was slightly more towards the yeah, the questionable side, even back in those days, and you could get away with it now, but not then, I think.
Right.
So yeah.
You mentioned before about a shared house as well. Was that with other members of the team from Games Workshop, or was that
Yeah. When I first moved up, it was a house with John Blanche,
right?
Wayne England, Stephen Tappin, and a figure painter called Ivan Bartlett.
Hmm.
It's a pretty shitty little house, actually, but it's squalid. Um, but I just moved up from London, so it was all exciting and new, and it was fun. But then we moved a little bit upmarket to a better, lovely old stone house on a better area of Nottingham, with Steve, Wayne, Chris Bone, and his then wife. I think that was us. Just yeah, and that was great, because I'd sit upstairs in my room after we'd eaten or hadn't been to the pub or something. We'd do some drawing, and Wayne would sit in his room painting little figures and things. So it was all very, a little creative hub. Great fun. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. But then yeah, so
And it was
you
funny, I mean, so I was say not funny, but it was odd. Never occurred to me then. But when I first moved up, that living with John there, who was technically my boss,
Hmm.
and he'd be off to work on his Harley every morning. And that was our alarm clock because he had to be there before us. So he's a Harley going off in the street outside. Oh shit, get up and off. Yeah, no, they were great days with a terrible diet. There was a fish and chip shop over the road and stuff like that. And four guys together, you can imagine there wasn't a lot of communal cooking going on. And
Sure.
yeah, happy days,
Yeah.
if somewhat chaotic. But
But eventually, then, as you say, after a certain amount of time, you were making the decision to leave Games Workshop. I mean, besides
yeah.
the sort of the color art and that kind of question, was there anything else in the way the company had evolved and changed that you sort of were reflecting on at that time you decided to leave?
Well, yeah, I mean, that it was actually when we lived in the little Higgledy Piggledy Enfield Chambers
Hmm.
place in Nottingham, and I can't remember the what you call it, the bureaucratic details of what had been sold by then, but they were just about to move into the big, more factory-like place. I can't remember the name of it now.
Right, would that be Castle Boulevard, would it?
Yeah, maybe Castle Boulevard. Yeah, it
Right.
must have been because I was never in Castle Boulevard. So, and I think they'd got new factory premises, and the whole thing was changing because I guess they'd got much bigger,
Hmm.
and they were aware of the potential. And basically, they actually we were called in one at a time, to ask, are you happy to be with us, kind of thing. And it was kind of a are you with us or against us,
Hmm.
interview. And I kind of opted to leave because I'd said that if I can't do color work, then yeah, I'm out,
Hmm.
And they said, right, you can't do color work. So I was out, but it's not bad mouthing anyone by saying that. It was just a change that had been happening by the company getting bigger. So we were more restricted in what we could do in the design studio.
Right.
So the more organic creativeness of it had gone pretty much completely. And there were much stricter briefs of, hey, we need 5 of these to fit this issue then, and they have to look like this. And with the Orks, it was just that time they started introducing glyphs and back banners, and it, oh man, just drove us crazy because all our, or mine or whoever else did them, all our energy had to be doing checking that, oh, this guy is a knob in a snakeskin, so he's got to have this back banner, he's got to have these glyphs that has to say that, and he's
Right.
only allowed to have this weapon. And slowly it just got stifling, and claustrophobic. And John was very sympathetic, but it was out of his hands,
Hmm.
So it was for army lists, yeah, and
Of
stuff.
course.
That, suddenly we were taken off doing beautiful, big narrative pictures to just doing endless little scribbles of this is five knobs, this is the engineers, this is this, and yeah, I really hated it, to be honest. And I couldn't see that it was ever going to change, especially if I wasn't allowed, if I was specifically told, no, you're not doing color work. And so they didn't want rumblings in the ranks. So I left, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's fascinating actually to reflect back on, because obviously, yeah, as you say, there's this overall shift into almost the uniformity in terms of
Yeah.
design, army lists. We're now going to structure things in this way. The specificity of what
Yeah.
miniature can exist and how they will be equipped and all that sort of stuff. And then that flowing into the arts and the briefs,
Yeah.
because they need to be more specific now as well. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, they had to specifically fit rules for what
Mm.
these little miniatures could and couldn't do on a tabletop scenario, I guess.
Yeah.
And I didn't care about that at all. It's I just wanted to make the pictures, do the art. So it had no interest in me at all. The tactical value of each little miniature or what particular weapon they were carrying.
Mm.
So yeah, it kind of took the enjoyment out of it, for me. But I understand, that was the world they're creating, and that's the direction that they maybe needed to go to if they wanted to grow. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it raises an interesting question actually, just around like how you interacted with the world outside of your art. Did you ever play any of the games or read any of the fiction or any of that kind of stuff, or was it more that's where the art is how you interact with it?
Yeah, I think you said it better than I could have done. Yeah, doing the art was my interaction with it.
Right.
I used to paint some miniatures as well,
Mm.
and we had to read a lot of the lore as part of the briefs for doing some of the artwork.
Right.
So, I mean, I did play some games, but that tended to be historical stuff with the Perry twins.
Right.
Every couple of weeks, we'd go around to their house, and we'd have these for fun, historical reenactment tabletop games with all the amazing miniatures that they'd collected over the years. But yeah, the tactics and ins and outs of the 40K universe, it sort of was completely over my head,
Sure.
Yeah, and it would be even more today when you say, how on earth would anybody know where to begin today?
Sure.
Just you see the size of the rule books and looking at all these almost mathematical tables of stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think that they accepting that are trying to find new accessible ways and sort of simplify this and kind of create little avenues for people to enter the world in a simpler way as an on ramp for the more complicated stuff, because it's vast now, isn't it? It's massive.
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't know. I've really kept away from it. But hey, I'm not knocking anybody else enjoying or spending their pocket money on it. That's fantastic, because at the end of the day, it helps people like me get work. So,
Well, I mean, it's a long legacy from the worlds that you were helping create. When they were first getting started and they were finding sort of what Warhammer fantasy was and what 40K actually was. I mean, thinking back, do you have almost a preference? Did you prefer working on the fantasy side or the 40K side, or is it all together this sort of experience that you had?
well, I think it's one great big rich melting pot. But I'm afraid it does go back to doing the orcs. I just did love doing the orcs. It's kind of what I grew up on, and it's still what I spend my time doing now. Not so much the orcs, but orcs, dwarves, and goblins and trolls. That's where it all started from when I was a kid. So I've been a very lucky bunny that I've been allowed to carry on doing that for all these years. So a workshop, it was definitely the orcs were the fun because I was allowed to spend the time on it. So I was allowed to what's the English, to deepen myself into it.
Sure, like immerse yourself in it.
Sorry?
Immerse yourself in it.
Immerse, that's it. Yeah. So I had the luxury of being able to immerse myself in it on my own terms in those days, which was priceless, and hopefully it's reflected in the artwork. Yeah, those were the best times. Yeah.
Yeah, I can understand that. And yes, very much reflected in the art. The other piece that I
Oh,
should have
thank you.
mentioned with the GW books was the Wolf Riders. So you did the
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Goblin
yeah.
Wolf Riders. That's
Yeah.
also an iconic image. That really
Thank
captures
you.
the feel of the Goblinoids, I think.
No, thank. Well, I mean, I love painting nature. I wish I had more time to do it, and animals. So the excuse to paint wolves and a nice forest as
Hmm.
well. That was, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
I remember doing that one. So,
great, yeah. I mean, the other, because obviously, when you did leave Games Workshop, you went on and have worked on many of the other sort of big fantasy gaming properties, whether that's Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering or Confrontation for Rackham and some of that stuff as
mhm.
well. I mean, was that kind of a similar experience, or did you find that being quite different to your time at Games Workshop?
Uh, well, I didn't work in house for any of them.
Hmm.
By then, I was based in Copenhagen. And when I left Games Workshop, I jumped ship to Denmark in Copenhagen. So I was working from a studio. So it wasn't the same immersion,
Hmm.
but uh, it was mostly I did like the Mutant Chronicles, I think, when I first, not long after I got there, some Swedes tracked me down and asked me if I wanted to do some. Because again, I was in danger of being sucked into this children's book nightmare, even in Copenhagen,
Right.
because it's a tiny place and there was no fancy market and still no internet, if I
Hmm.
remember back then. 1991 or something, would there have been an
Well, I
internet?
guess not necessarily in the public sphere as much, would it have been?
No, no. So yeah, they found me and ended up doing the Mutant Chronicles, and that was yeah. I mean, it's the same process for any kind of freelance artist that you get a brief and there's a bit of ping ponging back and forwards. Is this what you mean? No, can you just change that a bit? Or this would be good if it was yellow or red, because I was doing color then. They let me do color. I didn't have to do any sodding black and white work, so that was great. And it was the same with Rackham and Confrontation.
Right.
That was great. That was really a more organic process and done with an awful lot of passion from
Hmm.
some really clever people, and it was an excuse because again, in those days, you couldn't send a painting digitally in a few
Hmm.
seconds. So it was an excuse for me to go and have some weekends in Paris and actually physically take a painting over and meet like my friends Paolo Parente and Edward Guiton, a fantastic little concept artist, and see how they were doing it. And it was almost like the French version of the old Games Workshop studio, a
Right.
little rambling shack, on the outskirts of Paris with all these little people tucked away doing amazing things with miniatures and
Hmm.
world building and sculptures and painting. So that was really felt like I'd fell on my feet there,
Hmm.
and they did beautiful stuff, especially with the sculptures and
Indeed,
confrontation.
yeah.
It's a real shame they just sort of disappeared, splintered, and disappeared.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so you working on anything in the sort of fantasy sphere now? You talked about still working on dwarves and goblins and trolls. So are you still like illustrating and making that kind of art?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's all I do. I'm doing. Yeah. I mean, I've always got my own stuff going in the background if I've got time. I'm trying to do my own Beowulf book, which
Wow.
is that's all dwarfs and goblins and trolls. Because the original story of Beowulf, I've kind of said it a bit before that it became an old saga that men picked up on, but actually it goes back from even longer when before the men came and before the
Right.
dwarfs retreated into the mountains. So Beowulf and Hrothgar and Grendel, they were actually dwarfs and stuff.
That's great.
So I'm doing that, and I've I've just started some work or finished a painting for Trench Crusade. This
Amazing.
new thing I'm sure people have heard of.
Mm.
Well, that's something completely different for me. But then again, it's got, I mean, I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying it, but they've got echoes of what I remember from Games Workshop, but only because it's got mechanical stuff in it. And I haven't done that for a long, long time.
Mm.
But otherwise, it stands completely on its own feet and legs and proudly as well. Some
Mm.
wonderful stuff. So I'm doing that, and hopefully I'll get another one off them to do. What else? Can't do too many things. I mean, there's not that many hours in the day.
Sure.
As long as I can pay the bills and everything, then the free time I have, I try and do my own things, to keep myself happy, Although, I'm in a privileged position where most of the jobs I get offered, they do make me happy. Otherwise, I wouldn't do them, And like I said, it's always a challenge to do something new, and I'm aware of that. So I think it was Tormus had offered me something on Trench Crusade a year or so ago. I seem to remember, because I was under a vague contract with Simon Miniatures. I couldn't do anything else. That's it. Simon, forgot about that. Yeah, I spent 3 years doing a big game for them, the Dead Keep, was sort of a medieval dungeon crawler thing, and that was fantastic. I really enjoyed that. Got about 70 or maybe 80 character paintings and paintings for that, which I think is in production now. They had a finished Kickstarter or GameFound thingy, and hopefully people won't have to wait too long for that. But yes, so two of us had asked me about Trench Keep, and I said, it looks really interesting, but I can't sadly do it. And then when it's kind of finished with Simon, I suddenly thought, hang on a minute, I see if Thomas is still interested, and luckily he was. So that's great, We'll see what the future brings with that.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. And is it all color these days, or do you ever go back to the old?
Oh yeah. I won't do any black and white work.
You don't.
The only black and white work is the pencil scribbles to where I'm trying to formulate something. But no, it just doesn't interest me.
Fair enough.
Yeah. The world is color. We live in a wonderful color world. Why on earth would I want to sit and do black and white? I leave it to the professionals, because there's some good people out there doing it.
Well, Paul, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat to me. It's been terrific. So thank you so much.
No, it's an honor to be asked, and I hope you've got all the information you need or want.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny also, it's nice to be able to reminisce on stuff, because a lot of it is very formative. And those three and a bit years or 4 years where I was physically at Games Workshop, were very, it was a catalyst to everything I do now, so it's happy memories, and through the constant drawing in black and white, it actually made me get better and better and better, because you can hide stuff in lovely special effects and color painting, but you can't hide anything in black and white. So when I was doing anatomy, and dwarfs, orcs didn't always have a lot of clothes on. Sure. If you were drawing arms and feet, you had to get them right, or I did. I wanted to get them right. So it was a real good 3 years where I made myself learn a lot, so that I could be happy with the artwork that I was doing. Just now you know.
Fascinating. Well, yes, amazing. Thanks, Paul.
No, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul, for joining me and sharing those reflections about an awesome period in your career and some incredible, incredible work. It was a real joy, and I'm really appreciative of it. If you would like to support the work that I do, investigating the history of Games Workshop and interviewing the people that made the games we all love, then please consider checking out my Patreon via the link in the description below. It is the only way I'm able to keep doing this work, and I really appreciate any support that you can offer. It is hugely, hugely important. You can listen to my interviews as a podcast. Just search for In Conversation with Jordan Sorcery wherever you get your pods. You will also find episodes of the GW Films Club and the GW Books Club podcasts as well. I hope that you enjoy all of them. Thank you once again to Paul. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jordan, and this is Jordan Sorcery.